to Urban Maestras Rising,
where bi-weekly we will be covering topics centered on educating BIPOC students as BIPOC educators born and bred in NYC.
We welcome parents, allies, and educators to be part of our community of listeners.
If you are ready to take the next steps into these needed conversations,
then you've come to the right place.
We are your hosts,
Jackie
and Jazz.
Okay, guys, so we're back. Episode 3, where we're talking about COVID-19 and New York City public schools. So this is our part 2.
So in part 2, we'll be discussing the current responses and initiatives for students, and we'll kind of take on a macro perspective where we'll talk about federal funding, because federal funding was something that was huge for us, and that we were waiting on during the summertime to see if the HEROES Act would be passed. And some of you might know the HEROES Act based on like the first round of stimulus checks that occurred in May, as well as other legislation that it led on. And it's all in response to the coronavirus, and it's specifically brought on by the House of Democrats. And so the HEROES Act, the long-awaited HEROES Act, was finally passed on October 1st, 2020. And one of the things that it did, it's a pretty ambitious act because it's taking on $2.2 trillion to go into specific areas, such as provide support for healthcare workers, childcare. It also makes it possible to ensure worker safety, preserve health coverage, restores unemployment benefits, bolsters housing assistance, supports testing and tracing, and it's also supposed to safeguard our democracy by ensuring that we're doing safe elections, the census is accurate, and that we're preserving the postal service, because as we know, some absentee ballots are sent through the mail. But specifically in terms of our topic, which is education, we went from receiving $58 billion to $175 billion. And what this allowed for is really to address like our shortage areas, in terms of teaching, right? With the new demands of remote and there's a need for a larger teaching staff. And so
explain that a little bit. Like, for example, me, that I'm in the blended model and Jazz is in the remote model, remote only. So she teaches remote only. She's different. But me, I see our school picked a 3-day model. So I have group A, B, and C, but I don't see them all at the same time. So if I have group A, group B, and C are at home learning remotely. So we need another teacher to fill that spot. If not, I would be the one doing the double work, where I'm like preparing for the kids in person and the ones that are at home. So that's part of what the demand of teachers has come with the blended model.
Right. And also, and with that additional funding, at least in terms of the public education's response, they created a position that isn't quite utilized as much as it probably should be, or that a lot of schools have. But it was the virtual content specialist position, where they're thinking about or addressing the issue that teachers are intended to teach the curriculum, but there's an added layer with all this technology. And so the virtual content specialist is supposed to create lessons and make it possible for there to be continuity in the instruction that teachers are teaching, and sort of take away that additional burden.
Like the research that goes behind planning for your lesson.
Yeah. So definitely it has to do with planning, but it also has to do with how the curriculum changes, because we're on an online platform and it's not the same delivering content online as it is in person. And even for Jackie, that she's fully in person, it's not the same, because she only sees her kids like twice in a span of like 2 to 3 weeks. So
yeah, like for example, like group A, I don't see every day. I might see them twice this week, and then next week I'll see them once, but then the week after that I might see them 3 times.
Right. So there's a lot of changes. And what we're looking at in terms of New York City schools,
like how the curriculum has been like adapted to remote learning. So for example, like finding curriculum that has everything digitally, because a lot of the curriculums don't have everything that digital, like access, like the teacher's guide, the worksheets, or interactive games and interactive videos and lessons. Like not all curriculums have provide that. So there's been a switch of like moving from whatever we were using before to curriculums that have adapted a lot of remote digital resources.
And the part is, everything's not ready made, but it is a huge help in comparison to what we were doing in the springtime, which was a lot of creating our own content or trying to translate our in person curriculum into something that would work online.
I mean,
But
even simple as like our books, right? Like the books that we read to them, like the read alouds. When we left in March, like we thought that we were gonna be back in like 3, 4 weeks, so we didn't pack everything that we were gonna need for the rest of the year. So I remember like running like looking for books online that I can access digitally, because I don't have a whole school library in my house. And how was I gonna make that accessible to the kids? Or if I wanted to read a story to them, I had to like take pictures of it and then post it. But these curriculums already have the books digitally uploaded and scanned.
yeah, and like even I'm thinking about some of your challenges as an in person teacher, where you might have a library, but because of the pandemic and the fact that it's it can
Cross
be
the
transmitted on surfaces, we can't use our libraries. Um, but what the
But
in-person learning does allow for students to do is it provides a chance for teachers to really do targeted support and individualized attention. So that is a plus side to what's currently happening, where because teachers have anywhere from like 4 to 12 students, and they know which students are coming in the next day, they can really plan and prep for those students and meeting the needs of those kids. Um, Also, when it comes to after school programs have created online digital resources for enrichment, but they've also, at least in New York City, they've used tents and created outdoor spaces where students can receive some of that after school programming. So that is a very creative solution for our current situation. And also in terms of teacher training, we were all trained in trauma informed teaching practices and social emotional learning. And honestly speaking, um, it was super eye opening because it makes you think not only about ways to approach children and how trauma can manifest itself, but also in thinking about what you as an adult bring into the room. Because I think trauma teaching 101, the only thing you can control in a traumatic situation or like in a stressful situation is the response of an adult. And so it's very important to be aware of yourself and some of your triggers when dealing with trauma.
yeah, and that's what I was mentioning in part one, where there was a training that we were mandated to take, but I feel like it's so crucial, right, especially right now with everything that's going on. Um, Past traumas are showing up. They're presenting themselves a lot more often for everyone. So going back to what Jazz said, with like being aware of what we're walking in with as educators and adults dealing with children, what we come up, what we walk in with. Uh, it's been, yeah, I agree, eye opening, and like there will be situations where I respond one way, and that might be something that will set someone else off, or vice versa. So being aware of that helps you like slow down a little bit in your reaction, and take a more of an informed reaction to somebody's trauma.
Absolutely. And it sounds like also good practice in general because you're in the moment as opposed to thinking about or having anxiety about like what you need to do in the future. It helps you to better connect. And since we have such limited time with like in-person students, that's a major component right now. Like finding that human connection and solidifying those relationships.
Yeah, for sure. So we listen, we can sit here for days telling you about the challenges for remote teaching, with blended teaching. because there's a lot of anxiety behind using technology, period. Like just starting there, the use of
Hmm.
technology, the different levels of expertise in using technology, it varies, you know. Our older teachers or seasoned teachers might not be so tech savvy as opposed to someone newer into the education world. Um, but very easily, technology could be used as like a weapon where it could, you know, it shouldn't be, but it could measure it. Someone could say, oh well, she doesn't know how to do this, and that doesn't mean that they're not a good teacher, just they don't know how to use technology or vice versa. And learning to use all these platforms, like there's countless platforms out there that we can use for teaching, and it's like first to learn them, first to research them, then to see what would work best for our what, you know, for our audience, for our class, for our school is a whole nother thing. And all this stuff takes time, and we're literally like, you know, there's been a lot of quotes and memes going around saying like we're literally building the plane as it's flying.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how it's in the
Facts.
air, but this is literally how it
Hmm.
is. So like we are going to talk about challenges, but we are also going to talk about the silver lining with all of this. So modeling by practicing it ourselves. um it's been, the workload has been, I don't even want to say more, because I always felt like teaching has always been a heavy workload, but it's just so different. And like having to learn how to use things when you don't know how to takes up time. So that pushes you back, sets you back. Or when you come across tech issues. So I can have a lesson planned out and everything, and I just want them to see a video, and then my I can't log in, or I can't view a book that I have access to digitally. So all of that stuff really just adds into all the challenges. I also feel like socialization is basically the whole point why they introduce the blended model, for at least the kids to have some days where they're socializing with other kids, even though it's not like how it used to be. But it's still weird and eerie. I remember the first day of like in-person school. It was like all the kids were nervous. You can tell, even though they all showed it differently, and everybody was just scared. Just scared being around everyone. And I don't want to say that we're not scared anymore. I just feel like we're just getting accustomed to like constantly cleaning and constantly like, you know, giving each other space, and like uh, just following the procedures of social distancing. And the increase of the digital divide has been a huge challenge, not just with teachers, but like as we were talking before, with families and students and remote learning, you know, not being able to use technology because you're not tech savvy, or sometimes you know how to use technology and you're having connection issues. So the
Public schools have.
providing devices for students that need it. And one of the big issues has been that sometimes the device won't work for the app that we're using. So that comes in with like things that we have to consider, like, oh, if we're gonna use, what platforms will work with those iPads, you know? Um,
Right. And
what,
even so, some kids are getting backed up with assignments and like, because it takes a while from having a system that's already like automating the delivery to having to copy paste and like an assessment that has like 25 questions. You might have to put it into like Google Slides or something for a student. That takes time.
they can access a link. So as
Right.
teachers, we also have to plan backups to something not possibly working. Just because we want to make sure that that one or two or whatever amount of kids that might have an issue with accessing the link, for example, we want to make sure that all the kids are able to do the work without it setting them behind.
Right.
So yeah, it's just been it's been a lot, everybody. Just want you to know, buy your teacher friends a cup of coffee, buy them some wine.
Starbucks goes a long way.
Help send them a thank you note. Like,
Check in on them.
check in on them. Teacher friends, our teacher gang. Like, we gotta check in with each other. I'm constantly like reminding my coworkers, take a break. it's okay if you didn't get everything done, because not only do I need the reminders, but you know, practicing it with my coworkers too, like, hey, we need to pause, we did a lot today, because it
Definitely.
gets so
Community
like,
is huge right now.
what happened.
Building that community, either as groups of students or as teachers, it's huge right now because that's a good response to like dealing with the pandemic in general, like aside from the demands of education. And speaking of the pandemic, we really want to end off this episode with thinking about the pandemic as an opportunity to do a few things. And we can, although it's a start, there's still some issues. I think we're reaching a point where now it's becoming a bit more normal, like delivering online instruction or having that online component. But one thing we can do is right the wrong of like technology accessibility and internet access. Like at least, although the internet can be spotty with some devices that are provided by the public education system, at least now some of these students are really thriving. Like they're getting it. They're coming up with systems. They're understanding that there's a need to understand how to use these platforms so that they're able to do their work. I have a student in my class that we have so many tech issues that he said, let's just start a virtual help desk. And he's taken it upon himself to like check the virtual help desk every single day. And that's where all of our issues live. And anytime there's an issue with like an assignment or something, the student would post there, other students would answer. And it's like, it's just a thread that kind of gives the students a place to go to problem solve and to help each other out and build that sense of community. And that child that brought up that solution, it's like I didn't even have to remind him that he came up with that solution. Every single day he checks in with me and says, "Oh, everything's good with the virtual help desk." So students are feeling empowered.
That's
Students
so
are finding ways to connect with one another and to help each other out and build that same sense of community even online. And I'm talking like my kids are little. They're 8 years old, and so to see that happening and emerging from a student that might not have the best social skills, but he's able to do that and he feels successful. That
oh,
speaks volumes.
I love that, man. I love that. I love to see when they take initiative, and like even just my student coming up to me to tell me, yo, like, I'm this is stressing me out. That's an initiative, you know, taking that step. That's so dope. I love that.
Yeah. And so it really, at least for 3 to 5, it really gives them the opportunity to be a bit more independent, to work on their independence. I know it's super difficult. I can't even imagine having a child that's like in kindergarten, first or second, where they're barely learning their sounds and like concepts of print and having to deal with long term usage of like computers and things.
Yeah,
But
man.
yeah, I can't. Kudos to families and to teachers that are making it work. But at least in terms of older students, I feel like they're learning how to be responsible. Like I have kids that they email me directly whenever they have an issue. Their parents are barely getting involved. If anything, sometimes their parents might get involved, like if they need to explain a situation, but the kids are taking the initiative. They're doing what they need to do, and it's really teaching them accountability.
Mhm.
And they have like at least on Google Classroom, they have their dashboard where they see the assignments that they're missing, and they're able to follow up and speak on it. And I feel like this is different from the type of,
Dynamic, right?
yeah,
From
the dynamic that I saw beforehand.
yeah. I know, like, my there were some students like freaking out, like, oh, I couldn't access this or this and that, whatever. And I'm like, hey, and I like showed them like, right here in this part, you can send me something like, hey, I had trouble opening this, and now let me know why you didn't complete it, and so on. So they do it. They're like, oh, I'm done, or I have a question about this. And then when I give them feedback on their work, they're like, oh, thank you. Like they love reading the feedback because it's like little notes from me. And of course, I gave them feedback before. It was verbally, but now that it's written, it's to them it's more meaningful. It's just now I have to do written feedback all the time. So, but yeah, it's been pretty cool seeing like the positives to.
Yeah, and like even with that, the fact that you're giving them feedback, it's memorialized. Like the kids are able to go back to it. You're able to go back to it, and it gives you a running record of like everything that was spoken of, and it also makes it possible um, to do more targeted teaching specifically to certain students because at least the way our curriculum is designed now, there is reteaching and enrichment options for students that are either below or above grade level. And so it gives us the opportunity to really teach those kids. Also, the fact that some of these lessons are being like videotaped or that videos are being provided, students are able to rewatch lessons and work at their own pace. And we know not every student is like autodidactic in that sense where they're going to go teach themselves how to do something. But we do live in a culture that's very much relies heavily on like YouTube and like learning on your own. So I feel like this is like very much in line with that sort of thinking. So I think that with a little bit of practice, kids can really get the hang of this for the most part. Not saying that this is a long term fix because no one wants this pandemic to last any longer, but at least it really does help students get a sense of what kind of learner they are and how they learn best and some strategies that they can use in general for like learning any skill set that they possibly want in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I think it also the way it was designed, at least in public schools in New York City, it also allows for more communication with families because first off, Google Classroom provides immediate feedback. Parents can see the comments. Um, but also within our schedule, there is an office hours designated 20 minutes every day to speak to parents and sort of get that communication so that there isn't a mystery of like how their students how their child is doing because the information is there, the teacher is accessible. It's not if they need to meet, it's a quick Zoom meeting. It's not something like they need to come in person. So it does give options aside from like a phone call.
Yeah.
So
Or email. Yeah, they could just hop on Zoom during that time. And we did have allocated times for this before, but now it's every day we have the
yeah,
time to do that.
now it's more consistent.
Hmm.
And also with all these platforms, although for right now, might not be working at optimal functionality, but we are still getting different data points, ways that we can look at our students' work and we can think to ourselves, is it a matter of the kid not being able to understand the content or is it that technology is getting in the way? So it's giving us, it's almost like it's giving us a pro and a con at the same time, but there's
Hmm.
still data there. So it gives us, I feel like it gives us a more concrete way of accessing a student's skill set or like knowing how to approach them. Do you feel the
Yep.
same way or do you feel like you had a better hold on it
Or I think it's also
before?
like more immediate, as opposed to like, things are self-graded, right? There's some things that can be self-graded as opposed to me like going home and getting through the grading and then like combing through the who had the correct answers and then putting all that information onto a spreadsheet. Now it's like these programs are giving me the points, like it's doing it for me, in a sense where it's like, okay, these number of kids got this wrong, these got it right, these are the weak points, these are not. It's like building these data reports for me, and and much quicker, like I can more quickly say, all right, this group needs this group needs that, as opposed to like the longer process as from before.
Right. Like at least our math program, it the moment a student takes an assessment, it'll talk about the areas of strength and the areas that they need improvement. And then the way that the lessons are designed, the specific titles are um, very easy to just to find that particular standard and then be able to reteach it or provide enrichment for students that are excelling. So it makes it, it really streamlines the process of planning for differentiation.
Yeah.
And the fact that resources are readily available, it's like at a fingertip. And as long as you're signed in and you don't have any sign in issues, for the most part, resources will play. You have a range of like games, activities that students can do and that can be adapted for like a Zoom scenario or like a really small group scenario. So I think it's really making us think differently about how education can look and how like right now we have a cap, at least in the lower grades in third grade. We have a cap where students can only be online from a range from like I think 100 to 120 minutes. And although it doesn't seem like a lot synchronously, meaning at the same time as the teacher, it doesn't seem like a lot, but I feel like somehow those smaller bursts of teaching can sometimes be even more effective than being in school for the entire day or
Mm-hmm.
expecting to do certain things.
Right.
And it depends. It does depend on the learner, once again, because some students do need more of that physical interaction. But I do see how once you get almost like a feel for it, I think kids will be able to do either just as well as they did before or get to know themselves even better as a learner.
They're able to tell me like I prefer this learning this way versus that now. I feel like they're better at identifying that.
Yeah. And we mentioned it before, but like the trauma response training and thinking about that. And like the emphasis right now, yes, we do want to give them grade level content and help them bridge any gaps that they had from our initial take on responding to COVID. But at the end of the day, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And we need to be there for students because just the same way that school can be extremely traumatizing in a regular everyday scenario, imagine online world where
Mm.
sometimes it might not feel like you have easy access to a teacher. We have to think about not only the implications of the trauma that could be happening because of familial reasons like loss of jobs, loss of benefits, but also like the trauma in dealing with technology and not having your like not being able to touch your teacher and like tap her if you need help.
Or like
Um,
even just your classmates, like being able to do things that you were able to do before with your classmates. Um, I know Halloween's coming up and it's gonna be very weird.
yeah, like the kids were already like telling me like Halloween's not gonna be the same. Like they're wondering if I'm gonna dress up and asking me a bunch of questions. But I think it's because they want that sense of normal. They want to feel like everything's not that different, even though it pretty much is. And
Yeah,
it's
like for
really
example, my kids at the beginning of this, they were like, "Oh, can you do a joke of the day?" So that's something that I incorporate in the morning. Like when they walk in, I'm like, "Oh, you can be the joke of the day," because before COVID, in our school, every day I think like I want to say 9 o'clock or quarter to 9. One of the kids in fourth and fifth grade came up on the speaker and gave announcements. So they did a joke of the day. They talked about like things that were going on, events that were coming up or going on during the week. They gave the weather, and then they did like a word of the day where they gave like just a word and a definition how to use it in a sentence. And then we did the Pledge of Allegiance. So it was like something that was done every day. So just them asking me like, "Hey, can you give us a joke of the day every day?" And it was something I didn't think of. It was them also like asking for that, like their initiative. And I was like, you know what? Like that's their way of telling me like I want something normal.
yeah, they want like a predictable routine,
Mm-hmm.
the same way as they would get in school. Um, and thinking about something that came up at the same time as like the pandemic, which is like policies on race and protests. I think that with those things happening at a similar time frame, it has started more conversations. I've seen more not only self-care for educators, but I've seen more talks and more professional development around race relations and dealing with the fact that things are not the same. Like although we're all in a pandemic, it's not the same for low socioeconomic families as it is for those that are affluent. And really it's a race thing too. Like it's like oftentimes white families that are the ones that are privileged and black families or BIPOC families, black, indigenous, people of color are the ones that have
Limited access.
limited access and there's policies that are working against us. I think a lot of the policies are being revisited and people are advocating for less discrimination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Um, so we reached a time where we're gonna call ourselves in. and provide you some sort of plan of action that you can, you know, do in your daily lives. But like, we're calling ourselves in to have honest conversations with the kids, talking about adjusting and adapting as we go, modeling that, like how we cope with mental health in healthy ways. Things like limited screen time, unplugging from technology, maybe for the weekend, for the day, family times. Like family time could be board games, journaling, reading a physical book, or taking a walk. Whatever it is that is going to bond your family, and how that looks, it depends on what you guys like to do together, or your interests, or taking time to get to know your child's interests. It might be different from yours, and if you are having a hard time with adjusting and adapting to this pandemic, it's okay to say that, like, I'm having a hard time with this and I'm going to deal with it this way, or I'm doing this to help me cope with what I'm feeling right now. So modeling that, I feel, is very important.
So thank you for listening to our podcast, Urban Maestras Rising.
Follow us on our Instagram account, Urban Maestra Rising.
Please remember to share, like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hit the bell icon for notifications to stay up to date with our episodes.
Goodbye.
Bye.